Let's open up to Revelation chapter 13. We're going to begin today in verse 14. You know, I have to say that I just finished doing Revelation with a high school Bible class this week, and I really can't wait till we get to chapters 21 and 22. That's when it actually gets very exciting. We were talking about this Friday. The staff does some devotions, the church staff, early in the morning, most mornings, and we were talking about this, and Pastor Ray said, you know, every single Christian ought to memorize Revelation 21 and 22. If you ever get upset, depressed, or anxious, you just read them. It's absolutely uplifting, wonderful, wonderful stuff. But we have a ways to go before we get there, a little bit to get through, which is also exciting. Last week, we were talking about the second beast. It was introduced here in chapter 13, which is a false prophet, this person that leads the world in worship of the first beast, who is the Antichrist. And we find in chapter 13, verse 13, that he performed great and miraculous signs. This prophet will have the ability, the power given by Satan to cause fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. One thing I hadn't thought about that I actually read as I was preparing for today is that there is an instance of Satan doing this. There's a prior instance where fire came down from heaven and consumed Job's livestock. And that was when Satan, of course, was not allowed to lay a hand on Job at the time, but was allowed to touch everything that he owned, including his family. So there is a precedent for this, in fact, with Satan performing this particular miraculous sign, besides the precedents we have with God, of course, dealing with Sodom and Gomorrah, and Elijah bringing down the fire on the sacrifice when he confronted the prophets of Baal. So in verse 14, it tells us that because of these great and miraculous signs, he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast. He deceived the inhabitants of the earth, and he ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. This image we've talked about many times before. We all know what that is. It's what Daniel and Paul both speak about. Jesus talks about this abomination that causes desolation, and it's this idolatrous image that is set up in the holy place in the rebuilt temple. Why an abomination? Well, because it's the ultimate act of idolatry. It is Satan attempting to get the earth dwellers, the unsaved inhabitants of the earth, to actually worship Satan himself. It tells us earlier in the chapter that the prophet doesn't just convince people to worship the Antichrist, but in doing so, they actually worship Satan himself. There's no confusing language or cloudiness there. It seems clear that people are going to worship Satan openly, vocally. Now, not a lot of people do that today. Some do. I mean, Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan and those guys actually do that. But this is going to become widespread. People are going to become convinced, I believe, that Satan is the one true God, that he is the one, after all, that the Bible was a lie. He was maligned. He was libeled and slandered all through history, but he's the real one, and he's going to prove it through signs and wonders and all kinds of power. So it's an abomination. The reason it's called the abomination of desolation is that it's going to bring the full wrath of God down upon the earth. Desolate, meaning specifically that. The earth is going to be desolate, denuded. You know how we had this napalm, I guess, and defoliating type of bombs that we've used in jungle warfare. It's going to be burned. The water is going to be blood. There's going to be stinking dead animals every place. There's going to be bugs and flies and ticks and fleas and gnats and all kinds of gross stuff flying through the air. It's going to be desolate. Beyond what's described in the movies, the books, I think. It's going to be something we really have a hard time getting our imagination around. So this desolation will fall upon the earth. It is the abomination that brings the complete desolation of the earth. It's no wonder God creates a new heavens and new earth in 21 and 22. It's going to be pretty bad. So verse 15, he was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that it could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. Well, I've been thinking about this for a while. I actually got here first with the high school class. It's kind of been on my mind about what this image is going to be all about. And the first picture that pops into my mind, and maybe yours, is like a talking statue. Is that what you see? Every time I've heard of this phrase, I've thought of, well, he sets up an image, which is an icon, right? It's a statue, you think. That's traditionally what it would be. And the Bible talks over and over again about your gods that are made of wood and stone and metal and clay. So I've always seen in my mind kind of this statue, but it talks somehow. It's got maybe a mouth that moves and it speaks. But what about it would be so breathtaking that it would actually cause people to worship the Antichrist? Well, I don't know about you. I've seen lots of animatronic displays, where they got the robot. Their feet never move, I noticed, but they're always planted in one spot, but they move and they talk and their fingers never change. Like raise their hands like this and they gesture and this kind of thing. Never been fooled once. Not one time that I think, that must be an actor in a costume pretending to be an animatronic display. It's always obviously a robot of some kind. Even the movies we have today have these, CGI, computer-generated characters, and some are pretty good. I mean, they're very good. I was watching some of the specials on the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and some of the CGI stuff is very dramatic. For those of you who have seen this, there's a scene where this army is charging on horses against these big, elephant-type beasts, so the big tusks and stuff. And some of the horses that go through these terrible falls and are like butchered and stuff during the scene are actually CGI. They're not actually actors like pulling the reins and making them fall. They did it so realistically, you go, wow, but they're very fast. It happens it tricks your mind because it's so fast. I have not yet seen one CGI character in a movie that fooled me. Now, it may be coming, but into thinking that it was a real person. There's something about this image that makes it more than just a sophisticated cartoon or a holograph that will convince people beyond the miraculous signs manifested through the prophet that the Antichrist must indeed be the true manifestation of God on earth, and that Satan is the God that has given him his power. As unreal as it seems to you, and we sit here and think about, I can understand it. Somebody can get fooled in like a false religion or, not hear the truth. But everybody in the world has this basic understanding in their heart and their mind that there is a God and that there is an evil force of some kind that we call Satan, that there's good and bad, and there are entities that represent good and bad. But how is it that someone could actually be brought to a point where they would say, I choose the bad God and I worship Satan? Well, mankind by nature, we know, is built to worship. We're just designed for it. We have an irresistible impulse to worship something. And the second characteristic that is common to all people, we have eternity set in our hearts by God, so we want to worship something bigger than ourselves. And the second thing is that we have a rebellious heart. Now, what happens when you combine those two things? Well, contrary to what the atheists will tell you, what men want most is not the elimination of religion. If men are rebelling against God, they're not out to eliminate religion. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the founders of communism, were not out really to eliminate religion, even though they said so. What they were trying to do was to develop their own religion. Why? Because men are rebellious, and they have a built-in, undeniable impulse to worship. And you put those two together, and you end up with religion, which is what we don't have, by the way. Now, I know when you get into a discussion with somebody, and even James says this is true religion, and in the proper use of the term religion, traditionally, what we have is religion, the one true religion. But when you talk to people, you have to differentiate between religion and what? We always say the other R is a relationship with Jesus Christ. Because the way that I define religion, whenever I talk to somebody, I don't want to have a religious discussion. Great, neither do I. Let's just talk about Jesus. I got that from Ray. That works, by the way. Let's just talk about Jesus. They're like, I always say this. Did you know that Jesus hated religion? That always throws them for a loop. They're like, what? Because they think you're a religious nut. You're religious. You know Jesus hated religion? Oh, yeah. Let's go to John chapter 8 and read all about how he felt about religion, about the religious leaders and the head honchos of the day and the form of religion, but lacking its power. God, when rejected, doesn't stop people from worshiping. They just substitute something else in its place. And if it's not themselves, which it very often is, it's an idea, or they get committed to a cause or an ism of some kind, or lacking those things, they'll elevate a person into that place. How many of you here saw a fascinating special about 6 months ago? It was on the first time about North Korea. Anybody see that? It was really an amazing show. North Korea is the most tightly controlled society in the 20th century and going into the 21st. More than Russia, more than China, more than Cuba. Every aspect of their lives is dictated. And everyone's watching everyone. One of the fascinating things about this was that you didn't dare say a word against communism, the North Korean state, or against Kim Il-jung, who is the current leader there. Didn't dare say a word that could be even construed, possibly construed in a negative light, because your kids will turn you in. Or the parents will turn the kids in. Now, what would make somebody do that? What state of mind do you have to be in? How do you have to consider your relationship with the state or the leader in order for you to turn in your children to go to a prison camp and be starved to death if they speak against the leader? You have to worship the leader because you believe in your heart of hearts that there is a higher ideal than protecting your family. That's how it happens. As unbelievable as that seems to us, that's how it happens. I can remember back when I was in high school, I was pretty involved in like Model UN and that kind of stuff. So I was maybe more aware than the average bear, what was going on. Didn't have a real sophisticated understanding of it, but I kind of knew the players. We played North Korea. We always wanted to be North Korea, China, Russia, or France. The four countries everybody hates. And it was true then, it's true now. It's not right, but it's true. And so we always wanted to be the bad guys when you go to the Model UN conferences because everybody's out to get you, and it's more fun, I remember reading about the founder of the North Korean state, the man who was responsible for driving the infidels and the invaders and the West out of his country with the help of China, but without which they could not have done it. But that man was the original leader of North Korea, and that was Kim Il-sung. And he was a dictator there for, about 50 years or so after the Korean War. I think he died in 1994. And absolute control. And they called him, you know what his title was? Unofficially, by the way, the Savior. Because there's something about the Korean culture that because it's been dominated by foreign powers forever. The Japanese raped and pillaged the country. The Chinese have destroyed it. The Russians destroyed it. And so they saw us as the next wave. And so he was considered the Savior. I'm going to read you something, a paragraph from this daily newspaper, the Daily NK, or North Korean. This is in 2006. July 8th is the 12th anniversary of Kim Il-sung's death. In memory of his death, thousands of citizens will come to see the statue of Mansudai and Kumsusan Memorial Palace, whatever that is, where Kim Il-sung's embalmed body is still displayed. Guy's been dead since 1994. 13 years later, they still have his body in a glass case for people to come by. And you know what they do when they come by? They fall down and worship. They worship him. They have come to offer flowers and worship Kim Il-sung every year since his death in 1994. And now Kim Jong-il, his son, has taken his place, and there's a personality cult. And the weird thing, the thing that struck me the most about this TV special was whenever something good happened in someone's life, this doctor went over there and cured a lot of people's blindness. It was some parasitic disease. It was causing blindness, cured it. Every single person stood up, "Oh, thank you, General. Thank you, oh Savior Kim. Thank you." They didn't thank the doctor. Not one time did they thank the doctor. They were praising and worshiping. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. So there's a lot of evidence in the world today. The personality cult of Mao Zedong. Stalin did the same thing in his country. People will worship a person and abandon what they know to be true, Romans chapter 1, and set someone else up on the throne. So we shouldn't be surprised it's going to happen because people are moldable. If they reject the truth, they're moldable. Well, verse 16 tells us that the prophet, he also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, the amazing thing about this prophecy, of course, is that it was written about 2,000 years ago, close to 2,000 years ago now, where there was no world economy. I mean, I was going to say where the world economy was based on bartering, except there wasn't a world economy, really. But most of what was done was, I'll give you three sheep for, 15 chickens, I'll give you, a bushel of hay, if you'll mend my fence, type of thing. The highest level of technology, probably financially back then, was the abacus. Seriously, at that time. The modern way of trading, using dollar bills and coins that represent, theoretically, something that's, housed in Fort Knox, even though Nixon abandoned the gold standard back in 1971 or 2, something like that. So, when you take your dollar out and it says, legal tender, redeemable, guess what? It's not. You cannot walk into a bank, as you could 50 years ago, and demand $1 in gold. Say, here, I've got this piece of paper, it's worth nothing, but it represents a promise from the government to give me my gold back. That's what that used to mean until we abandoned the gold standard. I'm not going to argue about that, whether it's good or bad, but that's the way it is. But the current system of what they call monetizing the economy, in other words, not trading anymore in wheat and cattle, and not saying, here's a bunch of gold, give me that. Did you know, by the way, I read this a couple months ago, that the value of gold hasn't changed in thousands and thousands of years? Not really. It's gone up, inflationary, because what we monetize it to, the dollar, has become less valuable. So we say, well, gold is worth $300 an ounce. And 100 years ago, it was only like $60 an ounce. But the question is, how much will it buy? And it takes the same amount of gold to buy a good suit of clothes today as it did 200 years ago. That's why people use gold. It's very stable. So what we've done is we've monetized the economy. And we've said, use paper instead. So we all do that. I do it too. We call that cash. But that form of doing things is just a few hundred years old in its widespread sense. So there were coins, denarii and shekels way back then. But what you would do in Jesus' day, you would go in and they'd say, you got a denarii? Sure, here's a denarii. The guy says, let me make sure that's really a denarii, which is what, about a day's wages, right? He'd put it on a scale and have a little weight, and if it weighed up okay, it was a denarii. So it still wasn't monetized. It wasn't paper in place of the real thing. The form we have now is the full monetizing of the world economy happened during the last century. And today, you're not going to go down to the hardware store and bring a couple of chickens and pay your monthly rental payment on the iron plow that you're using. You're not going to do it. The nice thing about cash, of course, is it levels a lot of, there's no question is how much is a chicken worth, how much is a cow worth, and how many do you get for one or the other. That's a beautiful thing about cash. But the problem with cash, in the eyes of the world, businesses, the IRS, the Department of Defense, the government, is that it's untraceable. Did you know that drug kings and drug barons don't take checks? They don't take credit cards either. Why not? Because they can be tracked. They take cash, and cash only. So John is predicting the cashless society that is really just about upon us now. I just saw a commercial a month or two ago. That was really weird. It was this one of those, how they do feel-good commercials? They really play nice music and they have nice pictures and they get you like feeling all fuzzy and warm so you have a nice feeling. Coca-Cola is one that really kind of launched that whole thing with a, what the world needs today, Coca-Cola thing that, they didn't show you drinking Coke. It was just as you felt good, and so when you go to the store, you get a warm feeling and you buy Coke. That works. Lots of people do it today. Well, there was a commercial by Visa that was that way. It was flowers and like just kind of this cartoony thing with people going through it. And the whole pitch of the commercial right now, Visa is pitching the idea of never using cash again. Use it. I remember 15 years ago saying to Peg, why can't you use a debit card, your credit card, to buy groceries? I didn't get it. You could buy gas. You could go to the hardware store. You could go to Walmart. But maybe you don't remember those days. There was a day not that long ago, 10, 20 years at the most, you couldn't buy groceries. You had to use cash or write a check. And I wonder, what's the point of that? Well, there was no point. And they finally got online with all this stuff. And today, we are headed toward a cashless society. And John was predicting that 2,000 years ago. You ever wondered why the bank keeps sending you, how many of you here, don't raise your hand if you don't want to, still get your checks in your statement? How many don't get checks in their statement anymore? See, most of you don't get checks in your statement anymore. Why are they doing that? Well, because it costs 60 cents to process a check, and exactly. See, it costs 1 penny to process a transaction electronically for the bank. Now, Visa, MasterCard is going to charge the store 2.5%, but it's costing them a penny in labor and time and machinery and all that kind of stuff. They don't want you to use checks anymore. Trying to get you to use your check card. Instead, every business, from a mom and pop shop on the corner to Walmart, Home Depot, the local gas station, every one of them, business owner and manager knows something. There was a manager of a Walmart in this area that got fired because the inventory reduction was too great. You know what that means, don't you? Unauthorized inventory reduction. It's people taking stuff and taking cash when they shouldn't be. So every business owner knows that when cash changes hands, there's an opportunity to keep a couple off the bottom. So businesses want us to go to electronic. It's pilfer-proof. At least for most of us unsophisticated, non-computer hacker type people, cash is the only way you can pilfer, really. The IRS says that up to $1 trillion per year. That's a lot of money. The federal budget is what, 1.3 or 4 trillion? That's a big budget. That's all the tax. Well, actually, not that much tax money comes in, which is why we have debt and deficits. But still, we take in $1 trillion a year in tax money. Well, the IRS says that there's $1 trillion a year in business transactions that go unreported, income that is untaxed, and bartering, what they call the underground or gray economy, where I'll babysit for you if you give me that. Now, the IRS says, I want a piece of that. If you trade, your car for, that acre of property, you both got to pay tax. That's what they say. Bartering goods and getting unpaid, or getting paid under the table, this underground economy. You ever have a contractor say, well, if you give me cash, it's $12 an hour. You got to write me a check, it's $15 an hour. I can't stand that. That always drives me crazy. I'm like, I'll just pay you the check. I'm not going to get involved. Well, why pay the government? They're this corrupt and they're taking all our money and blah, blah, blah. It's like, whatever, pay into Caesar that which is Caesar's. Romans chapter 13, we all pay our taxes, right? That's what we're supposed to do. But there's $1 trillion out there that they aren't collecting tax on. Well, if they get, let's say, an average of 15%, that's $150 billion in tax revenue they're not getting. They want you to go, they want you to e-file, right? Most people e-file today. Now, I don't. I like my paper and my pen. As much as I'm a computer guy, I like knowing where it's going and when it got mailed, and I want my receipt at the post office and, delivery confirmation. They don't want you doing that. The Justice Department, through the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, is a huge proponent of cashless society. Why? Because the mafia, all organized crime, the drug lords, the crack houses, right down to the guy in the street work on cash. You start doing it electronically, a lot of that's going to evaporate. They'll find another way, maybe, but you're going to put a huge dent in organized crime if you get rid of cash. Well, this whole credit card, debit card idea was taken a step further by the U.S. Department of Defense. In 1993, they began testing a card called the MARC, the M-A-R-C. It's called the Multi-Technology Automated Reader Card. Now, it can be used as a debit card or a credit card, but it also has all the military information, allergies, medical history, you name it. All the personal information on this card. The problem with it was they can get lost or stolen. If somebody gets your card, so what they originally tried to do, kind of interesting, is they went to biometrics. You got to put up your palm or put your fingerprint in a reader, but those aren't that accurate, it turns out, for the most part. They can, at least at that time, hand cream could throw them off. They tried retinal recognition, but contact lenses in their position, they just weren't that accurate. So that's where they developed the idea of this implantable chip of some kind. Back in 2001, this is an article out of WorldNet Daily, but this is widely reported. They wrote this: many have seen the development of the implantable microchip as a fulfillment of the Revelation 13, 16, and 17 prophecy. Applied Digital Solutions is the company behind the chip, called Digital Angel. Isn't that interesting? Digital Angel, which sends and receives data and can be continuously tracked by global positioning satellite technology. So that was the upgrade from the card. The first people to use that card, by the way, were the Marines. And when we liberated Haiti, Operation Restore Democracy or something in Haiti in 1995, they were the ones that first carried the card. But the current version of that, the implantable chip they now put into the soldiers, can be tracked. You get a computer screen, satellite technology, GPS, real-time imaging, and you can tell where your troops are. They can be behind that building, over that ridge, hiding under the brush, and you know where they are. I suppose the best play would be to zap all the enemies with the same thing. You could track them too. Stick them with darts or something would be ideal. The device is powered electromechanically, kind of like a rewindable watch. As long as you move, it has power. and then it stores it for a certain period of time in case you're down on the field. Chairman and CEO of Applied Digital Solutions, Richard Sullivan, said, "We believe its potential," now listen to this, "for improving individual and e-business security and enhancing the quality of life for millions of people is virtually limitless." That's how it's going to be sold. You wouldn't want your children, what if they get kidnapped? What kind of a parent are you? You don't want a chip? I mean, you're doing it for, all the cats in San Francisco, one of our more progressive cities, by the way, by law, have chips under their skin now. The horses in many Kentucky and Tennessee farms have chips. Testing the technology, and it works. Although we're in the early development phase, we expect to come forward with applications in many different areas, from medical monitoring to law enforcement. However, we plan to focus our initial development efforts on the growing field of e-commerce security and user ID verification. If you don't know the number, you can't buy and you can't sell. Now, not to be too hysterical about things, this could be the form the mark takes. However, before you panic over the possibility, a couple things to consider. One is that we're not going to be here when it happens, probably. Now, they can start rolling the technology out ahead of time, before the tribulation begins, so it's possible. But it has to contain, remember this, take the scriptures literally. It has to contain the name of the beast, right? Or the number of the beast. The number can't be disguised. It gives us the number in verse 18. This calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. So, if someone were to, come to you and say, "Oh, gotcha, ha ha ha," oh, wrong hand. It better have 666 in it, or it doesn't mean anything anyway. I don't think they're going to surprise you in gotcha, by the way. But it has to be in one of two locations: forehead, on the forehead, on the hand, not in. It has to be visible. Now, these microchips can be planted just below the surface of the skin. Maybe it could be visible, but it has to meet certain qualifications. So, I don't freak out when I hear about they're putting, implanting microchips, and they're basically shooting them. They're usually put them into the shoulder or the flesh just up here on the chest, where it's kind of fleshy on the soldiers. That's not in the right hand. I'm sorry. It does not qualify according to the biblical standard here. The name of the beast. Well, the Bible doesn't tell us the name of the beast for a very good reason. Not that God doesn't know the name of the beast, but nobody knows the name of the beast besides God. By the time he is revealed, according to Paul in 2 Thessalonians, the Holy Spirit will be gone off the earth when the restrainer is removed. So that name won't be known, so that can't be done until that time. Now, what if we have our eschatology totally messed up? What if we're completely wrong and we're here during the tribulation? Well, God is going to protect those that are his. Even if we're wrong and the church goes into the tribulation, which I highly doubt. I just think the Bible exhorts against it continuously in many, many different places, both overtly and by implication, all over the place in Scripture, by typology and examples, and straight out of the mouth of the Lord and Paul and others. But if we are, God is not going to, "Oh, gotcha. Well, sorry. I knew you were mine, you were faithful, but I just thought, there's going to be a few, and you're one of the few that just got in the wrong line at the wrong time. You thought you were getting a vaccine, and bang, there you are." It's not going to happen. Now, if you're one of those pretend Christians that goes into the tribulation, and you think you're a Christian, you're going to church, and you're going to Sunday school, and you're doing all the things you're supposed to, but you really don't know the Lord, well, then there might be some surprises in store. Well, verse 18, this calls for wisdom. Calculate the number. It's man's number, 666. Well, why 666? We all know that Greek and Hebrew don't have, they're the only languages that have numeric equivalents. What I didn't know, I just found this out, is that they actually don't have numbers at all, not written numbers. That's why Greek and Hebrew, when Hebrews write Hebrew, they use Arabic numbers. Kind of interesting, isn't it? They're using Arabic numbers in Hebrew. But that's where our numbering system comes from. Instead of that, they would assign a letter. They'd say, "Oh, your child number beta," if they're Greek. Your child number aleph, your number 1 or your number 2 in the Hebrew. There's some graffiti that actually was found in Pompeii, in the ruins of Pompeii, written in Greek of this era, this Greek, the Koine Greek used at this time, that says, "I love her whose number is 545. So I didn't figure that name out. But in the Greek, that's what the letters, the 3 letters of this girl's name, were equivalent to 545. So it's called gematria. It's this this kind of hobby. It was very common then of transferring the numbers and the letters back and forth as a game. They probably had, Sudoku and, all kinds of word letter puzzles and stuff because that's what they did. Jesus' gematria is 888. So you can make something out of that probably. Fish is 1224, so it was a common practice. Many people have been assigned the title of Antichrist based on the number. I remember when Ronald Reagan was the president. Y'all remember this back then? That it wasn't what his name added up to, but that it was Ronald Wilson Reagan, 6 letters each. Oh, he must be the Antichrist. Well, he's dead now, so it probably wasn't him. Nero, that's what I heard. Nero, Augustus Nero or Caesar Nero, depending on how you did it, which direction you put it in, and exactly the version of the title, you could come up with a 666. There has been speculation about Stalin, about Mao, about the Pope and the papacy, and just all kinds of speculation has been made. I know it says, if you have insight, calculate the number of the beast. There have been so many mistakes made, I'm not even trying. I figure a lot of people have done it. They fulfilled that commandment. I don't need to because there's just who knows. So hard to say. Here are a few of the schemes. Just a minute left here that have been, and this is how bizarre it gets. Give you an idea of how dangerous it gets to tread into this territory. There's a Bible commentator, Poole, that wrote this. This is hundreds of years ago. That is 12, the square root of 144 is God's number. Okay, God likes the number 12, right? We know that. So 25 is the square root of Antichrist's number, 666. 25 times 25 equals something that ends in a 5. I know that much. I don't know what the number is, but it's not 666. It's a much bigger number than that. I think it's, thank you, 625? Okay, great. Antichrist, 666, therefore, by this enigmatical, in other words, mysterious expression, we are taught that Antichrist should be a political body that should as much effect the number 15 as God seemeth to have his church affected by the number 12. I guess. Here's another one. Trapp is a commentator I see quoted quite a bit. The year of Rome's ruin is held by some to be 1666. I disagree with that, by the way. I don't think that's the date. But it is plain, saith one, Satan shall be tied up 1,000 years. Okay, we agree with that. 666 is the number of the beast. Antichrist shall so long reign, and these two together make up the last number, 1666. 1,666, okay. Clark wrote this, here is the solution of this mystery. Well, someone who's confident. Here is the final solution of the mystery. Let him that hath a mind for investigations of this kind find out a kingdom which contains precisely the number 666, and this must be infallibly the name of the beast. The Latin kingdom, Rome, has exclusively this number. Some commentators observe that there are 6 Roman numerals. I, which is 1, V is 5, X is 10, L is 50, C is 100, and D is 500. Is that right? So if you add them up, and it works, add them all up, 666. What do you know about that? So that means the Antichrist must be a Roman. Okay. If you add up all the numbers from 1 to 36, just add them up, guess what it equals? You got it, 666. There's a million, what do they say? Figures don't lie, but liars figure. Numbers can be made to do almost whatever you want. What does this verse tell us to do? I think it's saying have insight into the meaning of the number. It's the number of man. It is 6, created on the 6th day, one number short of God's number of perfection, 7. Why do we have 3? I'm not sure why we have 3, but the few suggestions have been indicating the concentration of man's imperfection in the Antichrist, maybe indicating the unholy trinity of Satan, the Antichrist, and the prophet, 666. The King James Version renders this as, it is the number of a man, in verse 18. Now this is interesting. The only other person in the Bible connected with the number 666, there's one other person, is King Solomon. Back in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14, it says his annual income was 666 talents of gold. Now that's interesting. I find that fascinating. This might indicate something about the character of the Antichrist. Maybe what it's saying, it's the number of a man. Remember Solomon, who started well and finished bad. Everybody see The Omen back when they were teenagers? It was a long time ago, right? I saw it when I was a teenager. And the Antichrist is depicted as this little boy that's born and is evil from the moment he's born. Red eyes and fangs almost. Just a bad seed, bad kid. Well, maybe not. Maybe the Antichrist is a person who, through the corruption of power and wealth and political intrigue is corrupted, and maybe that's the reference to Solomon being corrupted by the power and the wealth. In any case, we don't need to be fearful. We don't have to obsess. You know, we do it because it's part of Revelation. That's why we're studying it. I hope you're not spending your time trying to figure out who the Antichrist is. You know, we're looking for the Christ. And I like to spend my time thinking about and contemplating him and his perfection and what he does with numbers, which is pretty cool. But the Antichrist himself, someone to be reckoned with, we're not going to be here when he comes. Well, Lord, thank you again for your word. And we ask that you would give us clarity of mind, Lord, not so much to understand the particulars, the numbers and the exact timing and the years here or the weeks here, and the personalities per se, but Lord, from all of that, to draw an understanding of who you are and what it is you want us to do today. Lord, not looking into a future and saying, well, we'll just sit here and cross our legs and fold our arms and just wait because the end is coming, to be fatalistic, but to occupy until you come, Lord, because you have instructed us to go out and make disciples of all nations. Father, help us not to get so caught up in this whole area of prophecy and eschatology that all we do is look forward to the next conference and having our ears tickled. But Lord, use it instead to motivate us, to draw us closer to you, to make our walk more pure. Father, have your way with us today. Draw us to yourself, we ask. In Jesus' name, amen.